The moment Brandon Williams hurled that bucket of crimson paint across the art studio, coating Maya Chen's pristine white uniform in dripping red, he thought he'd finally broken the quiet new girl who dared to ignore his advances. The entire advanced art class watched in stunned silence as paint splattered across easels, canvases, and Maya's shocked face. But when Maya slowly wiped the paint from her eyes and assumed a perfect fighting stance that none of them had ever seen before, Brandon realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his privileged life. What happened in the next 30 seconds would not only end his reign of terror at Lincoln Ridge High School, but would spark a revolution that changed everything about how power worked in their small Colorado town. This is the incredible true story of how one girl's hidden strength turned a moment of humiliation into a viral sensation that inspired thousands of students worldwide to finally stand up for themselves. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Chen had been at Lincoln Ridge High School for exactly 3 weeks, and she'd perfected the art of being invisible. At 17, she possessed a quiet elegance that came from years of disciplined training. Though no one at her new school knew about the black belt she'd earned at her grandfather's dojo back in San Francisco, her long black hair was always pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she favored oversized sweaters that concealed the lean muscle definition underneath. Moving to Colorado in the middle of junior year hadn't been her choice, but when her father received the promotion that relocated their family to the suburban town nestled against the Rockies, Maya had resolved to keep her head down and blend in until graduation. Lincoln Ridge High was everything her previous school wasn't. Where her California high school had been diverse and sprawling with over 3,000 students, Lincoln Ridge felt intimate and insular with its 1,200 students, who'd mostly known each other since elementary school. The hallways buzzed with the kind of tight-knit social dynamics that made newcomers either immediate celebrities or complete outcasts. Maya had deliberately chosen the latter, finding refuge in Mrs. Kim's advanced art studio, where she could lose herself in digital design projects and avoid the complicated social hierarchies that seemed to govern everything else. The art studio had become her sanctuary, a bright space filled with natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows that offered views of the snow-capped mountains beyond. Mrs. Kim, a soft-spoken woman in her 40s who'd moved from Seoul a decade earlier, understood the isolation of being an outsider and had taken Maya under her wing. The advanced art class was small, only 12 students, and Maya had found peace in the quiet concentration that filled the room during their independent projects. She was deep in work on her latest piece, a digital illustration combining traditional Asian calligraphy with modern graphic design elements when she first encountered Brandon Williams. Unlike the athletic bullies she'd heard stories about, Brandon was different. At 6 feet tall with perfectly styled brown hair and designer clothes that screamed family money, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. He was the captain of the debate team, president of the Model UN Club, and rumored to have already been accepted to 3 Ivy League schools through his father's connections and donations. Brandon's power didn't come from physical intimidation, but from something far more insidious: his ability to destroy reputations with surgical precision. Maya had observed him from afar during her first weeks, watching how other students either gravitated toward his charismatic personality or carefully avoided drawing his attention. He had a way of making cruel observations sound like witty commentary, of turning social situations into performances where he was always the star. His closest friends, Ryan Mitchell and Kevin Torres, served as both audience and amplifiers for his particular brand of sophisticated cruelty. Ryan was the more traditionally handsome of the two, a sandy-haired boy whose family owned the largest ranch in the county. He'd been Brandon's best friend since childhood and had learned to navigate their friendship by always agreeing, always laughing at the right moments, and never questioning Brandon's judgment. Kevin, on the other hand, was newer to their circle. A transfer student from Denver whose desperation to fit in made him willing to do whatever Brandon asked. Together, they formed a trio that dominated not through fear, but through social influence and the kind of casual cruelty that adults often dismissed as normal teenage behavior. Maya first appeared on Brandon's radar during her second week when she politely declined his invitation to sit with his group at lunch. She'd been eating alone in the library, perfectly content with her book and sandwich, when he'd approached with his characteristic smile. "New girl should sit with the right people," he'd said, as if bestowing a great honor. When Maya had simply said, "Thank you, but I'm fine here," and returned to her reading, something had shifted in Brandon's expression. He wasn't used to disinterest, especially from someone he'd deemed worthy of his attention. The rejection had been quiet, witnessed only by the librarian and a handful of studying students, but for Brandon, it represented something unprecedented. At Lincoln Ridge High, he was accustomed to being pursued, courted, and treated as a prize to be won. Maya's indifference challenged the very foundation of his social identity. In the days that followed, he began what he called the project, a systematic effort to break down Maya's defenses and assert his dominance. It started small. Comments about her clothes being very California, delivered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Questions about why she was hiding in the art room instead of joining normal social activities. Observations about how her digital art probably wasn't as challenging as traditional mediums, delivered during the moments when Mrs. Kim stepped out of the classroom. Maya endured it all with the same quiet composure her grandfather had taught her, never rising to the bait, never showing that the comments landed. But Brandon's frustration grew with each non-reaction. He'd built his reputation on being able to read people, to find their pressure points and exploit them for either entertainment or control. Maya's serene indifference to his provocations felt like a personal failure, and in his mind, that failure demanded correction. The situation escalated when Maya's latest digital piece caught the attention of Mrs. Kim, who announced it would be featured in the school's upcoming spring art showcase. The piece, titled "Bridge Between Worlds," was a stunning fusion of traditional Korean hanbok designs with modern American cityscapes, representing the immigrant experience through bold colors and flowing lines. Mrs. Kim's enthusiasm was genuine and effusive, calling it one of the most sophisticated pieces she'd seen from a high school student. For Maya, the recognition was thrilling but also terrifying. She'd chosen art as her refuge precisely because it allowed her to remain unnoticed. And suddenly she was being thrust into the spotlight she'd worked so hard to avoid. Brandon watched Mrs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Kim's praise with growing irritation. In his mind, Maya was already receiving more attention than she deserved, and now she was being celebrated for work he privately dismissed as computer stuff that anyone could do. The announcement that her piece would be the centerpiece of the showcase felt like a direct challenge to his position as the school's most celebrated academic achiever. He'd won awards for his debate performances and model UN leadership, but those victories felt diminished by the genuine excitement Mrs. Kim showed for Maya's work. That evening, Brandon called an emergency meeting with Ryan and Kevin at his family's sprawling house on the hill overlooking town. The three boys sat in Brandon's bedroom, surrounded by debate trophies and college acceptance letters, planning what Brandon called a reality check for the princess. Maya's morning routine at Lincoln Ridge High had become as precise as the kata forms her grandfather had taught her back in San Francisco. She arrived exactly 15 minutes before first bell, when the hallways were still relatively empty, but the building was unlocked, giving her time to navigate to her locker and gather materials without becoming caught in the social crossfire that erupted once the buses arrived. Her backpack contained the usual academic essentials: But hidden in a zippered compartment were photographs from her grandfather's dojo, reminders of a world where discipline and respect mattered more than designer labels and family connections. The Chen family's relocation to Colorado had been sudden and jarring. Maya's father, Dr. Michael Chen, had been recruited by a cutting-edge biotechnology firm developing revolutionary cancer treatments, an opportunity too significant to refuse despite the timing. Her mother, Linda, had been less enthusiastic about leaving their established life in California, where she'd built a successful real estate practice and where Maya had roots dating back to early childhood. The decision had created tension in their household, with hushed conversations behind closed doors and a palpable sense of sacrifice that Maya felt responsible for, even though the move had nothing to do with her. What her parents didn't fully understand was how completely Maya's identity had been shaped by her relationship with her grandfather, Master Chun Wei. Every afternoon since she was 6 years old, Maya had walked the 4 blocks from her elementary school to his small dojo tucked between a dim sum restaurant and a traditional medicine shop in San Francisco's Richmond district. The dojo was nothing like the modern martial arts studios with their flashy equipment and promotional banners. Master Chun's space was austere and traditional, with worn wooden floors that had absorbed decades of practice, mirrors that reflected not vanity but technique, and walls lined with calligraphy scrolls that spoke of discipline, honor, and inner strength. Master Chun had been teaching martial arts for over 50 years, having begun his training in Taiwan before immigrating to America in the 1970s. He was a small man, barely 5 feet 6 inches tall, with hands that looked delicate, but could break boards with casual efficiency. He spoke English with a heavy accent that grew thicker when he was annoyed, but his instruction transcended language barriers. He taught Maya that true martial arts was never about aggression or showing off, but about developing the character to avoid conflict whenever possible, and the skill to end it decisively when avoidance failed. Under her grandfather's guidance, Maya had progressed through the ranks with methodical dedication. She learned not just the physical techniques of karate, but the philosophical foundations that governed when and why those techniques should be used. Master Chun emphasized that the strongest fighters were often those who never had to fight, that true power came from the confidence to walk away from provocation and the wisdom to recognize when walking away was impossible. He taught her to read body language, to anticipate aggressive behavior, and to remain calm under pressure. By age 15, Maya had earned her black belt, but Master Chun's lessons went far beyond belt rankings. He taught her calligraphy, meditation, and the art of maintaining inner peace regardless of external circumstances. Their afternoon sessions often concluded with tea and philosophical discussions about strength, responsibility, and the burden that came with possessing skills others didn't. Power without wisdom is destruction, he would say in his careful English. Wisdom without power is helplessness. You must cultivate both, but never let others see your hand until the moment demands it. The move to Colorado meant leaving behind not just her grandfather's physical presence, but the daily reinforcement of values that had shaped her entire worldview. Master Chun was too old and too established in San Francisco to relocate, and while they maintained contact through video calls, the distance felt overwhelming. Maya had researched martial arts schools in Colorado, but none felt right. They were either too commercialized, focused more on trophies than technique, or too far from her new home to be practical with her parents' work schedules. Lincoln Ridge High School represented everything Maya had been taught to navigate carefully. The social hierarchies were based on wealth, family connections, and superficial achievements rather than character or genuine accomplishment. Students drove expensive cars that cost more than many families earned in a year, wore clothes that served as status symbols, and treated academic success as something that could be purchased rather than earned. Maya watched her classmates with the same analytical attention her grandfather had taught her to apply to potential opponents, recognizing the insecurities and desperation that drove much of their behavior. Her daily schedule was deliberately structured to minimize social interaction. First period AP Chemistry provided academic challenge without requiring group work. Second period World Literature was taught by Mr. Patterson, an elderly teacher who appreciated thoughtful analysis over class participation. Third period was her free study hall, which she spent in the library's quiet section, often helping underclassmen with math problems. Fourth period brought her to Mrs. Kim's art studio, the one place where Maya felt genuinely comfortable expressing herself. Mrs. Kim had recognized something special in Maya's work from the very first day. While other students in the advanced class focused on traditional mediums like oil painting or sculpture, Maya gravitated toward digital art that allowed her to blend Eastern and Western aesthetic traditions. Her pieces often incorporated elements from her grandfather's calligraphy lessons, flowing brushstrokes that she translated into digital form with sophisticated software she'd taught herself to use. Mrs. Kim understood the cultural significance of Maya's artistic choices and encouraged her to explore themes of identity, displacement, and cultural bridge building. Lunch presented the greatest social challenge of Maya's day. The cafeteria was a battlefield of unspoken rules and rigid territorial divisions. She'd learned to arrive slightly late, after the initial rush had settled into established patterns, and to choose a seat at the periphery where she could observe without becoming the focus of attention. Maya had perfected the art of eating quickly while appearing relaxed, always maintaining awareness of her surroundings in case retreat became necessary. Her one genuine friendship had developed organically with Jessica Rodriguez, a sophomore, who served as secretary of the student council and possessed an innate sense of justice that reminded Maya of her grandfather's teachings. Jessica was one of the few students at Lincoln Ridge who seemed genuinely unimpressed by wealth and social status, focusing instead on academic achievement and community service. She'd approached Maya during her first week, simply asking if she needed help finding classrooms, and their friendship had grown from that small act of kindness. Jessica came from a working-class family where both parents held multiple jobs to support their children's education. Her father worked construction during the day and cleaned office buildings at night, while her mother served as a teaching assistant and took college courses online, working toward her degree. Jessica understood what it meant to be an outsider. Though her outgoing personality and leadership abilities had earned her respect across social boundaries, she served as Maya's guide to Lincoln Ridge's complicated social terrain, explaining the unwritten rules and warning her about potential pitfalls. Through Jessica, Maya learned about Brandon Williams' reputation and methods. Unlike the stereotypical bullies who relied on physical intimidation, Brandon operated through psychological manipulation and social engineering. He identified students' insecurities and exploited them with surgical precision, often while maintaining plausible deniability that made adult intervention difficult. Jessica had witnessed his treatment of other students who'd somehow offended him, describing how he could systematically destroy someone's social standing while appearing to be merely offering friendly advice or constructive criticism. Maya's afternoon routine varied depending on the day's obligations, but she always carved out time for solitary practice. Her family's new house included a finished basement that her parents had assumed she'd use for typical teenage activities, like watching movies or hosting friends. Instead, Maya had transformed it into a private training space, complete with mats, a punching bag her father had installed without asking questions, and mirrors that allowed her to practice forms and techniques. Every day after completing homework, she would spend an hour maintaining her skills, running through kata sequences that kept her muscle memory sharp and her mind focused. These practice sessions were more than physical exercise. They were meditation. In motion, opportunities to process the day's frustrations and maintain connection to her grandfather's teachings. Maya would begin each session by lighting incense and spending several minutes in contemplation, remembering Master Chun's lessons about patience, discipline, and the importance of emotional control. The physical training that followed was intense and precise, every movement deliberate and purposeful. Her parents occasionally expressed concern about Maya's solitary nature at her new school. They'd grown accustomed to her independence in San Francisco, where her grandfather's dojo had provided both physical activity and social connection. Dr. Chun worried that the move had isolated his daughter more than anticipated, while Linda fretted about Maya's apparent lack of interest in typical teenage social activities. Neither parent fully understood that Maya's apparent withdrawal was actually strategic, a conscious choice to avoid the kind of attention that might force her to reveal capabilities she preferred to keep hidden. The decision to maintain secrecy about her martial arts background hadn't been difficult for Maya. She'd observed how students at Lincoln Ridge reacted to anything that made someone stand out as different or potentially threatening to established social orders. She'd watched a transfer student from Texas become completely ostracized after mentioning his family's military background, and she'd seen how quickly rumors could spread about anyone perceived as unusual or potentially dangerous. Maya understood that revealing her black belt status would either make her a target for students wanting to test her abilities or create expectations for her to become some kind of protector or vigilante. Master Chun had always taught that the best martial artists were those who never had to prove their skills publicly. "The tree that bends survives the storm," he would say, "while the tree that stands rigid breaks." Maya had internalized this wisdom, choosing flexibility and adaptation over confrontation, at least until circumstances made other choices impossible. Brandon Williams understood power in ways that most 17-year-olds never would, primarily because he'd been wielding it since elementary school, when other children first realized that crossing him meant facing consequences that extended far beyond the playground. His father, Robert Williams, owned the largest automotive dealership network in 3 counties, employing over 200 people and wielding influence that reached into every corner of their Colorado community. The Williams family name appeared on hospital wings, scholarship funds, and the cornerstone of Lincoln Ridge High School's newest academic building, a constant reminder of their generational wealth and community standing. Unlike the crude bullies who relied on physical intimidation or social media harassment, Brandon had refined his approach into something far more sophisticated and devastatingly effective. He operated like a corporate executive, identifying targets, analyzing their vulnerabilities, and executing campaigns designed to achieve specific outcomes with minimal personal risk. His methods were so subtle that most adults dismissed his behavior as typical teenage social dynamics, while his victims often found themselves questioning whether they'd imagined the systematic nature of his attacks. The Williams mansion sat on 5 acres of perfectly manicured grounds overlooking the town, a monument to success that had been featured in Colorado luxury home magazines twice in the past decade. Brandon's bedroom occupied the entire 3rd floor, complete with a private bathroom, sitting area, and balcony that offered panoramic views of the Rocky Mountains. The space was decorated with his academic achievements, debate team trophies, Model UN awards, and framed letters from Ivy League admissions offices expressing interest in his applications. Every element had been carefully curated to reinforce his image as Lincoln Ridge's most promising young leader. Robert Williams had built his empire through a combination of genuine business acumen and ruthless, competitive instincts that he'd passed down to his son without reservation. He taught Brandon that influence was more valuable than money, that reputation could be weaponized, and that the key to maintaining power was ensuring that challenging you carried consequences severe enough to deter future opposition. These lessons weren't delivered through formal instruction, but absorbed through years of watching his father navigate business disputes, community politics, and social situations with calculated precision. Brandon's mother, Catherine Williams, had been a sociology professor at the University of Colorado before her marriage, bringing intellectual sophistication to the family's wealth. She'd instilled in Brandon an appreciation for psychological manipulation and social engineering that elevated his tactics beyond simple cruelty. Catherine understood human behavior with academic precision, and she'd unconsciously taught her son to read people's insecurities, identify their pressure points, and predict their reactions to various stimuli. Her influence made Brandon dangerous in ways that went far beyond typical teenage meanness. The inner circle that surrounded Brandon consisted of carefully selected individuals who served specific functions in his social ecosystem. Ryan Mitchell had been chosen for his family's agricultural wealth and his unquestioning loyalty, while Kevin Torres provided newer money and desperate ambition that made him willing to take risks the others wouldn't. Together, they formed a triumvirate that dominated Lincoln Ridge's social landscape through different but complementary approaches. Ryan Mitchell's family had owned the largest cattle ranch in the county for 4 generations, their wealth older and more established than even the Williams fortune. The Mitchell Ranch employed dozens of workers and controlled thousands of acres of prime Colorado grazing land, making them power brokers in local politics and community decisions. Ryan himself was classically handsome in a way that photographs, well, with the kind of all-American features that made parents assume he was a good influence on their children. His easy smile and natural charisma masked a calculating intelligence that he'd learned to suppress in Brandon's presence. Ryan had understood since childhood that his friendship with Brandon required careful navigation. Brandon's need to be the dominant personality in any relationship meant that Ryan had to project competence without competition, loyalty without subservience. He'd mastered the art of being Brandon's trusted lieutenant, offering suggestions that sounded like requests for guidance and providing support that appeared spontaneous rather than calculated. Their friendship worked because Ryan genuinely enjoyed the benefits of Brandon's protection while remaining content to operate in his shadow. Kevin Torres represented newer money and hungrier ambition than either Brandon or Ryan possessed. His father had built a successful construction company that specialized in luxury homes and commercial developments, earning enough wealth to purchase a place in Lincoln Ridge's exclusive community, but not enough generational standing to guarantee acceptance. Kevin carried the burden of proving his family belonged, making him vulnerable to Brandon's manipulation in ways that Ryan's established position protected him from. Kevin's desperation to maintain his position in Brandon's inner circle made him the most dangerous member of their group. Where Ryan operated from confidence and Brandon from entitlement, Kevin acted from fear of exclusion that could drive him to extremes the others wouldn't consider. He understood that his social survival depended entirely on Brandon's continued approval, a dynamic that Brandon cultivated and exploited when situations required someone willing to take greater risks. The 3 boys had perfected a system of social control that operated through multiple layers of influence and intimidation. Brandon served as the strategic mind, identifying targets and designing campaigns tailored to each victim's specific vulnerabilities. Ryan provided charm and credibility, his family's respected name lending legitimacy to their actions. Kevin handled the implementation of more aggressive tactics, his status insecurity making him willing to cross lines that might damage someone with more secure social standing. Their approach to Maya Chen had been methodical from the moment Brandon identified her as a problem requiring solution. Her indifference to his invitation represented more than simple rejection. It challenged the fundamental assumption that his attention was valuable and desirable. In Brandon's worldview, people were either allies, assets, or obstacles, and Maya's behavior clearly placed her in the final category. The fact that she seemed genuinely uninterested rather than playing hard to get made her particularly intriguing and threatening. Brandon had spent considerable time analyzing Maya's behavior patterns, social connections, and potential weaknesses during her first weeks at Lincoln Ridge. He'd observed her solitary lunch habits, noted her preference for peripheral seating in classrooms, and cataloged her limited interactions with other students. His initial assessment suggested someone suffering from social anxiety or depression, conditions he'd successfully exploited in previous campaigns. Maya's consistent composure and apparent contentment with isolation didn't fit the profile he'd expected, creating cognitive dissonance that demanded resolution. The intelligence-gathering phase had involved subtle questioning of teachers, casual conversations with students who shared classes with Maya, and careful observation of her daily routines. Brandon learned about her artistic abilities, her academic performance, and her family's recent relocation from California. He discovered her friendship with Jessica Rodriguez, which he initially viewed as a potential weakness, but later recognized as a complicating factor that required careful handling. Mrs. Kim's enthusiasm for Maya's digital artwork had escalated the situation beyond simple social gamesmanship. Brandon viewed academic recognition as his exclusive territory at Lincoln Ridge, where his debate championships, model UN leadership, and early college acceptances had established him as the school's premier intellectual achiever. Maya's artistic success represented unwelcome competition for adult attention and institutional recognition that Brandon considered rightfully his. The decision to escalate their campaign against Maya had been reached during the strategy session. In Brandon's bedroom, where the three boys analyzed the situation with corporate-level planning, Brandon outlined his assessment of Maya's psychological profile. Ryan contributed observations about her social isolation, and Kevin volunteered to implement increasingly aggressive tactics designed to provoke a reaction. Their plan involved systematic harassment that would escalate until Maya either submitted to Brandon's authority or provided justification for more severe measures. The beauty of their approach lay in its plausible deniability and gradual escalation. Each individual incident could be dismissed as typical teenage behavior or misunderstood communication, while the cumulative effect would be psychological pressure that most adults wouldn't recognize as coordinated harassment. Brandon had used variations of this strategy successfully against other students who'd somehow offended him, achieving his objectives while maintaining his reputation as a campus leader. What none of them anticipated was Maya's complete immunity to their psychological tactics. Her apparent indifference to their provocations wasn't defensive posturing or suppressed emotion, but genuine detachment that came from inner confidence they couldn't understand or undermine. Her grandfather's training had prepared her for exactly this type of systematic pressure, teaching her to remain centered regardless of external circumstances and to recognize manipulation attempts for what they were. Brandon's frustration with Maya's non-reactions had begun affecting his performance in other areas of his life. His debate team teammates noticed increased irritability during practice sessions, and his teachers observed a subtle decline in his typically flawless academic presentation. The situation was consuming mental energy that he'd previously devoted to maintaining his carefully constructed image, creating stress that manifested in ways he didn't fully recognize. The announcement that Maya's artwork would be featured prominently in the spring showcase had been the catalyst that transformed Brandon's irritation into active hostility. In his mind, Maya was already receiving undeserved attention simply by existing at Lincoln Ridge, and now she was being celebrated for achievements he privately dismissed as less challenging than his own academic successes. The fact that Mrs. Kim's genuine excitement for Maya's work exceeded any enthusiasm Brandon had received from teachers struck him as a fundamental injustice requiring correction. The collision between Maya's quiet determination and Brandon's escalating frustration reached its inevitable breaking point on a gray February afternoon when storm clouds gathered over the Rocky Mountains, casting Lincoln Ridge High School in an ominous twilight that seemed to foreshadow the conflict about to unfold. Maya had stayed after regular school hours to work on her showcase piece in Mrs. Kim's art studio, taking advantage of the advanced computer equipment and professional lighting that allowed her to perfect the intricate details that made her digital composition so compelling. The building was largely empty, except for a few dedicated teachers' grading papers and students involved in various after-school activities. Mrs. Kim had stepped out for a faculty meeting, leaving Maya alone with her work and the comfortable silence that she'd come to associate with creative flow. Her latest piece was nearing completion, a stunning visual narrative that traced her family's immigration journey from Taiwan to California to Colorado, using traditional brush painting techniques translated into digital medium with layers of symbolic imagery that spoke to the universal experience of displacement and adaptation. The work represented months of careful planning and execution, incorporating elements from her grandfather's calligraphy lessons and her own observations about cultural identity in contemporary America. Maya was completely absorbed in adjusting the color balance on a particularly complex section when she heard the art studio door open with more force than necessary, followed by the sound of expensive sneakers on the polished concrete floor. She didn't need to turn around to know who had entered. Brandon's presence carried a particular energy that she'd learned to recognize, a combination of entitlement and barely controlled aggression that seemed to charge the air around him. Ryan and Kevin's footsteps followed, their patterns familiar from previous encounters in hallways and common areas. "Working late again, Maya?" Brandon's voice carried a false friendliness that made her skin crawl, the tone people used when they wanted something and weren't planning to accept refusal. Gracefully. "That's very dedicated of you. Very impressive. But I think we need to have a conversation about your submission to the spring showcase." Maya saved her work before turning around, a habit her grandfather had drilled into her during their computer lessons years earlier. She faced the three boys with the same calm composure that had frustrated Brandon's previous attempts at intimidation. Her posture relaxed but alert, hands visible and ready to move if circumstances required it. The art studio suddenly felt much smaller with their presence. The creative sanctuary transformed into something resembling an interrogation room. "I wasn't aware my artwork was a topic that concerned you," Maya replied evenly, her voice carrying no hint of the wariness that prickled along her spine. She'd learned from her grandfather that showing fear or anger only encouraged bullies, while maintaining dignity often confused them enough to create opportunities for de-escalation or escape. Brandon moved closer to her workstation, his eyes scanning the monitors that displayed her nearly completed piece. His expression shifted through several emotions as he processed what he was seeing: surprise at the sophistication of her work, irritation at its obvious quality, and something approaching genuine appreciation that he quickly suppressed. Ryan and Kevin flanked him in a formation that Maya recognized as deliberately intimidating, positioning themselves to block her access to the studio's main exit. "See, that's where you're wrong," Brandon continued, his voice dropping to a more serious register that abandoned all pretense of friendliness. "Everything that happens at Lincoln Ridge concerns me, especially when it involves someone who doesn't understand how things work around here. Mrs. Kim has been talking to other teachers about featuring your piece as the centerpiece of the showcase. That's a problem." Maya felt a familiar calmness settle over her, the same mental state her grandfather had taught her to cultivate when facing potential conflict. Her breathing remained steady, her muscles relaxed but ready, her mind processing multiple potential scenarios and responses. She'd anticipated that Brandon's harassment would eventually escalate to direct confrontation, though she'd hoped it might wait until after the showcase. "I fail to see how my participation in a school art exhibition creates a problem for anyone," Maya said, keeping her tone conversational despite the obvious threat building in the room. Mrs. Kim selected pieces based on artistic merit, not social considerations. Kevin shifted restlessly behind Brandon, his nervous energy apparent in the way he fidgeted with his phone and avoided direct eye contact with Maya. Ryan remained perfectly still, his handsome features arranged in an expression of casual interest that didn't quite mask the calculation in his eyes. Maya noted their positions and body language, automatically assessing potential threats and escape routes as her training had taught her. Artistic merit, Brandon repeated with a laugh that contained no humor. Is that what we're calling it? Computer graphics that any kid with YouTube tutorials could learn? You've been here for 3 weeks, Maya. 3 weeks. Do you really think you understand this school well enough to take center stage at our most important cultural event? The accusation stung more than Maya wanted to admit, partly because it echoed her own insecurities about being an outsider, trying to find her place in an established community. Her grandfather had taught her that the most effective attacks often contained grains of truth, making them harder to dismiss and more likely to create emotional responses that clouded judgment. She recognized Brandon's tactic for what it was, but still felt the brief flare of self-doubt that he was trying to provoke. My length of attendance doesn't diminish the quality of my work, Maya responded, pleased that her voice remained steady, despite the emotional manipulation she was experiencing. Art speaks for itself, regardless of who creates it or how long they've been part of a particular community. Brandon's expression darkened at her refusal to be intimidated. He'd expected Maya to show some combination of fear, anger, or defensive justification that would give him psychological leverage to exploit. Her continued composure was undermining his confidence in his ability to control the situation, creating the kind of unpredictability that made him most dangerous. You really don't get it, do you? Brandon said, moving even closer until Maya could smell his expensive cologne and see the calculation in his ice blue eyes. This isn't about art. This is about respect. This is about understanding your place. I've been the academic star of this school for 4 years. I've earned the recognition, the awards, the teacher attention. I've put in the work. Ryan stepped forward slightly, adding his voice to the intimidation campaign. Brandon's already been accepted to Harvard early admission. His debate team has won state championships. He's earned the right to be Lincoln Ridge's representative at important events. Maya glanced at Ryan, noting how his support for Brandon seemed genuine rather than merely strategic. She realized that Ryan actually believed their argument had merit, that Brandon's previous achievements somehow entitled him to control opportunities for others. The insight made her understand that she wasn't just facing calculated cruelty, but also deeply ingrained entitlement that these boys had never been forced to question. I'm not competing with anyone, Maya said carefully, recognizing that her next words would determine whether this confrontation escalated further or provided an opportunity for resolution. There's room for multiple talented students at any school. My participation doesn't diminish your achievements or your value. Brandon's face flushed with anger at what he perceived as condescension in her tone. In his mind, Maya was refusing to acknowledge his superiority while simultaneously claiming equality that she hadn't earned. The combination of her calm demeanor and reasonable words made him feel foolish, which only intensified his need to reassert dominance through more aggressive means. Here's what's going to happen, Brandon said, his voice taking on the cold authority that his father used during business negotiations. You're going to withdraw your piece from the showcase. You're going to tell Mrs. Kim that you've decided you're not ready for that level of exposure. You're going to recommend that she feature work from students who have earned the privilege through years of dedication to Lincoln Ridge. The demand hung in the air between them like a challenge thrown down in a medieval court. Maya understood that her response would define not only her relationship with Brandon, but also her ability to maintain her identity and principles in her new environment. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind about the importance of choosing battles wisely while never surrendering core values that defined who she was. No, Maya said simply, the single word carrying more weight than any elaborate refusal could have managed. I won't withdraw my piece. I won't recommend other students over my own work. And I won't let you dictate my participation in school activities. The silence that followed her refusal was electric with tension and possibility. Brandon's carefully constructed image of control had been challenged publicly, in front of his closest allies, by someone he'd expected to intimidate easily. The moment represented a fundamental shift in their dynamic, transforming what had been harassment into open warfare with consequences that none of them could fully anticipate. Kevin finally broke the silence with nervous laughter that sounded forced and uncomfortable. She really doesn't know who she's messing with, does she? Maybe we need to help her understand how things work around here. Brandon's smile returned, but it was cold and predatory now, devoid of any pretense of friendship or reasonable discourse. Oh, Maya's going to learn exactly how things work. One way or another, she's going to understand that there are consequences for disrespecting people who've earned their position. Aren't you, Maya? The aftermath of Maya's defiance began before she even left the art studio that evening. Brandon's fury at being publicly contradicted manifested immediately in a series of text messages that lit up his phone as he coordinated with Ryan and Kevin outside the building. Their plan was swift and surgical, designed to demonstrate to Maya exactly what happened to students who failed to recognize the natural order at Lincoln Ridge High School. By the time Maya finished saving her work and gathering her materials, Brandon had already set in motion a campaign that would transform her from anonymous newcomer to school pariah within hours. The first strike came through Lincoln Ridge's most powerful weapon of social destruction, the anonymous confession account that dominated student social media. Within 30 minutes of Maya's refusal, a carefully crafted post appeared on Ridge Secrets, the Instagram account that served as the school's digital gossip mill and character assassination platform. The post featured a blurry photograph of Maya working in the art studio, taken through the window by Kevin while Brandon distracted her with conversation. The caption read like a carefully researched character study designed to hit every possible insecurity and social pressure point. Reality check. New girl thinks she's Picasso after 3 weeks at Ridge. Maya Chen from California apparently told Mrs. Kim that Colorado students aren't sophisticated enough to understand her advanced digital concepts. Sources say she laughed about how easy it would be to dominate our art program since nobody here has real training. Also heard she thinks our school is culturally backward compared to San Francisco. Girl really said she's only here temporarily and can't wait to get back to civilization. Someone needs to remind her that Colorado kids have talent too, and we don't need outsiders telling us we're not good enough. Who does she think she is? The post's genius lay in its mixture of plausible details and complete fabrications, woven together in a way that felt authentic to anyone who didn't know Maya personally. Brandon had studied enough of her background to include accurate elements like her California origins and Mrs. Kim's enthusiasm for her work, while the invented quotes played into existing regional insecurities about East Coast and West Coast prejudices against Colorado. The post was carefully designed to make Maya appear arrogant, entitled, and dismissive of her new community. Within an hour, the post had accumulated over 200 likes and dozens of comments, each one more vicious than the last. Students who had never spoken to Maya felt qualified to judge her character based on anonymous allegations. The comment section became a feeding frenzy of resentment and manufactured outrage, with students sharing their own invented encounters with Maya's supposed arrogance and cultural superiority complex. Several comments referenced her expensive-looking art supplies and questioned whether her family thought their California money made them better than hard-working Colorado families. Maya discovered the post when Jessica Rodriguez called her that evening, her voice tight with concern and barely controlled anger. Jessica had screenshot the post and its comments before they could be deleted or modified. Recognizing immediately that Maya was being targeted by someone with sophisticated knowledge of social media manipulation. She'd seen similar campaigns. Destroy other students' reputations, and understood that Maya was facing a coordinated attack rather than organic social disapproval. "This is really bad," Jessica explained as Maya scrolled through the comments on her laptop screen. "People are already talking about it in group chats. I've had 3 different friends ask me if the stuff about you is true. Someone's put a lot of thought into making you look as terrible as possible." Maya read through the post and comments with growing disbelief and anger. The fabricated quotes were so completely opposite to anything she'd ever said or thought that they felt like descriptions of a completely different person. She'd never expressed any negative opinions about Colorado or its people, had never discussed her temporary residence plans with anyone at school, and had certainly never claimed superiority over local students. The malicious creativity involved in constructing such detailed lies both impressed and horrified her. Who would do something like this? Maya asked, though she already suspected the answer. The timing was too perfect, coming just hours after her confrontation with Brandon in the art studio. The level of detail suggested someone who had been observing her carefully and had access to information about her family background and academic performance. Jessica's silence confirmed Maya's suspicions. "I can't prove anything, but this feels like Brandon Williams' style. He's done similar things to other students who've crossed him. The combination of true details with made-up quotes is his signature move. Plus, he's one of the few people who would have access to information about your family's relocation and Mrs. Kim's comments about your work." The social media attack was only the beginning. Over the next 24 hours, Maya experienced the full scope of Brandon's influence at Lincoln Ridge High School. Students who had previously been friendly became cold and distant, their interactions marked by suspicion and barely concealed hostility. Her morning routine became a gauntlet of whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, pointing fingers that tried to appear subtle, and social isolation that felt as deliberate as it was sudden. In a P chemistry, her usual lab partner requested a switch, claiming she'd prefer to work with someone she knew better. The teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, approved the change without question, leaving Maya to complete experiments alone while her classmates worked in pairs. During world literature, students who normally participated eagerly in discussions fell silent when Maya offered her perspectives on the assigned readings, creating awkward pauses that made her contributions feel unwelcome and disruptive. Lunch became particularly brutal as Maya realized that her usual seat at the periphery of the cafeteria no longer provided anonymity. Instead, it made her a visible target for stares and whispered commentary from students who felt emboldened by the social media posts to express their disapproval openly. Several tables of students made pointed comments about entitled Californians and fake artists that were clearly intended for Maya to overhear. The campaign's sophistication became apparent when Maya discovered that Brandon had enlisted allies beyond his immediate circle. Students from various social groups had been fed slightly different versions of the story, each tailored to appeal to their specific concerns and prejudices. The debate team heard that Maya had questioned Colorado's intellectual capabilities, while art students were told she dismissed local artistic traditions as primitive. Athletes learned that she'd expressed contempt for Colorado's sports culture, and academic achievers heard that she'd claimed East Coast schools were inherently superior to anything available locally. Maya's teachers began treating her differently. As well, though more subtly than her fellow students, Mrs. Kim remained supportive but seemed more cautious in her praise, perhaps worried about appearing to favor the controversial new student. Other teachers who had previously encouraged Maya's participation became cooler in their interactions, their enthusiasm dampened by whispered conversations in faculty meetings about the attitude problems some students were experiencing. The Psychological pressure was relentless and expertly applied, designed to make Maya question her own perceptions and doubt her ability to distinguish reality from manufactured drama. Brandon had created a situation where defending herself would require calling dozens of her classmates liars, while remaining silent seemed to confirm the allegations against her. Every response or lack of response could be interpreted as evidence of the character flaws attributed to her. Maya found herself analyzing every interaction for signs of manipulation or genuine hostility, wondering which students' behavior reflected their honest opinions and which had been influenced by Brandon's campaign. The uncertainty was perhaps the most insidious aspect of his attack, making her doubt her ability to navigate social situations and eroding the confidence she'd built during her first weeks at Lincoln Ridge. Jessica remained loyal but admitted that defending Maya was becoming socially costly for her as well. Other student council members had questioned Jessica's judgment in befriending someone with such obvious character issues, and her own reputation was beginning to suffer from association with the school's newest pariah. The isolation was precisely what Brandon had intended, cutting Maya off from potential allies while demonstrating the consequences of opposing his authority. Maya's parents noticed her changed demeanor but attributed it to normal adjustment difficulties rather than coordinated harassment. Dr. Chun suggested that Maya might be experiencing culture shock from the transition between California and Colorado social environments, while her mother wondered if academic pressure was creating stress that manifested as social anxiety. Neither parent could imagine that their daughter was being systematically targeted by sophisticated psychological warfare disguised as typical teenage drama. The situation escalated when Mrs. Kim approached Maya privately after art class, her expression troubled and uncertain. "Maya, I need to ask you something directly. Several students have come to me with concerns about comments you allegedly made regarding our art program and Colorado students in general. I want to give you an opportunity to address these concerns before they affect your standing in the showcase." Maya realized that Brandon's campaign had succeeded in reaching the adults who controlled her academic opportunities. Mrs. Kim's question was phrased diplomatically, but the implication was clear. Maya's participation in the spring showcase was now conditional on satisfying concerns about her attitude and respect for the school community. Brandon had managed to transform her artistic achievement into a character test that she was apparently failing. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.